Australia has approved more than 50 defence exports to Israel in this calendar year alone, more than any other country we're exporting to, but it cannot confirm how those military-specific goods and materials have been used and whether or not they were used in accordance with international law. Here's what's going on. Earlier this week, it was revealed that the Australian government approved 322 defence exports to Israel between January 1, 2017 and March 31, 2023. The figures were disclosed by the government in response to questions on notice from Green Senator David Shoebridge, who raised more questions at a Senate estimates hearing on Wednesday. But at the hearing, the Defence Department has refused to give details on the exports, nor could it confirm how the exports were used by the third parties buying them. So here's how the hearing went. Senator Shoebridge was questioning members of the Australian Defence Department in attendance, mostly the Deputy Secretary of Strategy, Policy and Industry, Hugh Jeffrey. Firstly, the original figure of exports to Israel in that 6-year period was 322, but it was confirmed at the hearing that as of October 25, there were actually 340. Shoebridge asked if any had been approved since the war in Gaza began on October 7, and the first Assistant Secretary of Defence Industry Policy, David Shoebridge, responded that another question on notice would need to be filed to the department, who would need to check. The department pointed out several times in the hearing that Australia's defence exports aren't necessarily weapons. They're broadly categorised as military-specific goods or dual-use devices and can include things like radios, body armour, software, vehicle parts and sporting equipment. Shoebridge proceeded to ask what the exports were and whether the department was checking how they were used. Jeffrey said, "We don't have a remit to seek to control the good at once exported. That informs the risk appetite when we consider any defence export permit." Shoebridge interjected to say, "So whether it's Saudi Arabia or, to list some other countries where these exports have been made, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Israel or the Philippines, regardless of where the weapon and or dual-use equipment is provided, once it's offshore, there's no checking, no review as to whether or not it's used in accordance with the permit, let alone in accordance with the rule of law." Jeffrey responded and said that's not quite correct. While the export control regime doesn't exist extraterritorially, if there is credible evidence that defence exports from any country have been used to commit human rights abuses, that will inform how we deliberate on decisions on future permits. But he eventually said the only way to guarantee a defence good had or had not been used in a certain way was by ensuring there are no exports to that country. Australia's annual defence exports are valued at billions of dollars every year, and we supply goods all over the world, including, as Shoebridge mentioned, to countries at war and countries where human rights abuses are committed. The Greens are now calling for greater government transparency on who we are selling weapons to, what those weapons are, and how much they cost. Shoebridge said, "When Australia changed governments last year, there was hope it would reverse the coalition's push to make Australia a top 10 global arms dealer. Instead, the Albanese government has doubled down on arms sales to some of the world's most troubling regimes." Also at a Senate hearing this week, Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong acknowledged widespread suffering of innocent civilians in Gaza and said the government had called for a humanitarian pause to get assistance to innocent civilians in Gaza. But neither she nor Anthony Albanese has yet gone as far to call it collective punishment as some other MPs have. At the same time, Anthony Albanese was in Washington visiting with US President Joe Biden, where they made a joint announcement and said, "We grieve for the loss of every innocent life, whether that be Israeli or Palestinian."